Hi, you're listening to Boggy Talk, Faith Conversations in the Mud, a resource of Church on Bayshore. Boggy Talk is recorded on Boggy Bayou in Niceville, Florida, and is hosted by Justin Wyatt and James Ross, pastors at Church on Bayshore. We typically want every matter of faith and life to have crystal clear answers, but it isn't always that easy. This podcast digs in to help Christians think with a kingdom mentality about topics that sometimes get muddy and bog us down. So let's dive in.
Hey, and welcome to Boggy Talk. Thank you for joining us today as we are kicking off a new series. New series. Before that, I'm going to say hey to James Ross, faithful co-host. How you doing, buddy?
I'm great. It's weird to kind of be back to just like our normal
I know. We got all
setup.
those guests done. Like they're out of here.
Yeah.
Pastor Appreciation Month last month. Interviews. They were very cool.
It was great. Yeah. Hey, let's rank them 1 through 4.
Who was your favorite? I was just about to say. So in terms of congeniality,
Yeah.
They all really were, great.
They were good.
Good insights. And I've had people, just from the community share with me that they appreciated that. So
you know who my favorite pastor was that we had on last month?
Who?
You, Justin.
Oh, man. You're so cool.
I appreciate you.
I appreciate you, buddy.
I see you.
I hear you. You are seen and heard.
That's right.
Very heard.
We are very heard. Heard too much. People are going to start saying like, we don't hear you anymore.
Yeah. So we are kicking off a new series this week talking about problems with Christians. And we're building off of a teaching series that we are in called He Greater Than Tradition. We're continuing through the book of Mark. And as we get to chapters 7 and 8, which is where we've been on Sunday mornings, we start to see this shift of Jesus instructing and teaching and confronting some of the beliefs of some of the religious leaders and how they were performative in their actions and their righteousness they viewed as being because of what they did. So we're just talking through, hey, this is a lot of what happens even now in culture. And some of the things we're going to talk about in the next few weeks are really inspired by some of the topics that were requested by you, our faithful, wonderful listeners.
You are listening
viewers,
audience.
Who just say, hey, we would love to hear some
audience.
more about the audience. Yeah, what is a listening audience? There we go.
I prefer not to call them our audience, but our friends.
Friends, we see you and we hear you.
If you could see that, if you were listening to that, you didn't get to see the super cheesy.
That was like a
super cheesy.
The Michael Scott, everyone's my friend in the but no one's
Also, like mega church, doesn't say anything confrontational, talk where they're like, "You're okay."
That's right.
I mean, you're really not because of all the choices you're making in your life, but I want you to feel good and keep giving to our church.
Feel good.
Yes.
You're okay. So speaking of tradition.
Speaking of problems with Christians.
So we're going to be talking about things like being hypocritical, being sheltered, being too political. But today we're kicking it off with probably something that everyone has been accused of at some point because, it's just an easy target, I think, in some ways. But that is... And then sometimes it's rightfully deserved.
Keep building up this attention.
What's it going to be?
What is it going to be?
Yeah, say it on the count of 3. Guess it. It's 1, 2, 3. Judgmental. Being judgmental.
You could be on Blue's Clues.
That's right. I've one time when I was younger,
you
someone was
look like you could be on Blue's Clues.
They told me I've been told that I could have been that guy.
Are you serious?
When I was when it was popular younger, when we were young. Yeah, because
who told you that? Not your mom.
No, she wouldn't have known.
You up like that.
No, she was hard knocks. Like that
She's like, if you want to be on Blue's Clues, you got to get this stuff together right now.
Exactly. So we're gonna stay on.
That's so
it's
dumb.
Been so long.
So dumb. I know.
We've had to be short on time because of other people. So now we just get to
Rural told me I couldn't make any jokes when he was on, so I had to be very serious. So I'm getting it all out.
Getting all out. So what do we mean when we say people are judgmental or Christians can be judgmental? What do you mean, man?
Oh, what do I mean?
What do you mean if somebody asked you that?
Well, that's interesting because I think that people mean all kinds of things.
I think the first thing, sorry to interrupt. I asked you a question. I'm going to interrupt you. But I just think
what is this conversation at my house?
Dad, but what?
But really.
I was just thinking, the first thing that comes to my mind is like the Christian trope that you see in most, like when Christians are portrayed like in a TV series or in a movie, there's always like the token Christian who's like super prudish and really judgmental and out of touch with culture. And that's what I think most people think of when they, when is the last time you've seen like in a show or TV or media that's not quote unquote Christian movie or something, a Christian portrayed like actually dealing with issues. Their faith is like integrated in their life and they're not being portrayed as the judgy person.
Yeah. I mean, I think that some people would just say our society is kind of unique. It's a Western individualized thing where we don't really value community. Like that's beyond Christianity. I mean, we're just in period. And, I think anytime someone like infringes upon your personal autonomy, there's a tendency to say, well, they're being judgmental. They have no right to say that, which is really a fallacy in societal thinking. And Christians live by an ethic that does say, hey, there is societal living. And so I think that like any of that, like, hey, we think that there should be this moral code when it comes to marriage. We think there should be this moral code when it comes to these ethical issues. Like you're judgmental to say that I'm doing something wrong, I think is really kind of like at a basic level what I think most people mean. Mm-hmm. And then there are indeed the people who, I think it's more hypocritical, which we'll talk about next week, but who will be like, you shouldn't do this, but I'm going to go over here and smoke because the way I talk, clearly.
Exactly.
Yeah. Sorry, that was my smoker voice.
Smoker voice.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, that was better than mine.
Smoker voice.
Yeah.
I think too, it's like
we love you if you smoke, but
it's
stop.
Okay.
Please stop.
Yeah,
we
it's
love
just
you.
not good.
Yeah.
It's just not good for you. I think of people saying, like, you can't judge me. Only God can judge me. Like that's kind of the mentality of like, I have license to do whatever I want to.
Yeah.
And my version of God is the only God who can judge me.
So we're getting kind of off of track of our process here, but that's okay. Right. So when people say, you can't judge me, only God can judge me. Do you realize like the significance of that statement? You're saying God can judge me.
Yeah, exactly. So you're admitting that God can judge you. Yeah. And if God can judge you, wouldn't you want to know the standards? Like, it's like, I don't know if you ever had that teacher in school who was like, you never knew how they were grading. And so you just try to like do everything right. And then you get your paper back and you're like, you got a bad grade, but you didn't know what you were supposed to do. Don't you want to know the standards before you apply or submit? Yeah.
My humanities teacher in community college, that was her, but she was always high, but she gave me an A. So you know what? It worked out. It worked out.
Because she had very subjective standards. She's like, whatever.
One of our tests were like, we listened to all these popular songs. We had to write down what the name of the song was. It's like,
that's a good skill.
And on one of them, I didn't know Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds by the Beatles. So I wrote the song about Lucy and she gave me an A. She gave me credit.
Wow.
Yeah, you guys really care. But really, I think a lot of people like that kind of God. Yeah. Like, because that kind of God essentially just exists to make you happy. Mm-hmm. And it's like, that's okay if God is just like, who cares if you know the song title? But when it comes to like our choices that affect our children, our choices that affect the people in our society, our choices that affect ourselves. Like God is too loving to be like, it's okay,
Yeah. So let's talk about some examples. When people say Christians are judgmental, what are some things that people are? What are some specific examples? Obviously, like you can't judge me. Only God can judge me.
Well, the smokers probably thinking we shouldn't have said anything about them smoking.
Yeah.
That's one.
I think of like basically any moral issue where people just want to do what they want to do without accountability. So
don't tell me what to watch on TV.
Yeah, you can't tell me to do that. You can't. You can't tell me what's right or wrong. You can't tell me how to live. You can't tell me.
I can watch. Who you tell me I can't drink or how much I can drink. Who you tell me how I spend my money,
time. Yeah, all
who you tell me how to raise a kid. Who you tell me how to get divorced. Who you tell me who to love. Who are you to tell me? I mean, yeah, anything.
Yeah. So let's talk about like this issue, judgment in scripture. And like the Pharisees were doing this to people. Like you talked about this in a sermon recently, how the Pharisees and religious leaders had created extra rules and we're judging people according to their traditions.
right.
Like I've decided these things are good, and so now I'm judging everyone else according to my own standards.
Yeah, some things we covered last month were the Pharisees being upset about the ritual purification and, about the eating of food, certain foods. And, in both of those instances, like it would have been okay, hopefully I articulated this, for the Pharisees to say, we don't think you should do this. And here's why we don't think you should do this. But because those weren't hard, fast biblical issues, to then enforce them was one step further. Now, where they really went bad, because, if they're leaders and they have authority, like they can, come up with a code. And if you don't like it, you find another group of religious leaders. I mean, churches kind of have standards. That's okay. But where they really went bad is they began to think it made them righteous and make other people unrighteous. And that takes away from the grace of God.
Yeah, I think that it's this unwritten like moral code that makes us righteous. And I think so culturally, I'm going to use this as an example. This is, our next door neighbor is a hoarder. And he just has stuff.
For clarity, he said hoarder.
Hoarder.
Make sure people heard the dir.
The dir. And
anyway, we're talking about
he has
movies.
There's stuff. I mean, at one time, he's had some help, and we've tried to help some. He had stuff coming out of it. I mean, it was just everywhere, all over his driveway. It looked really bad, and you can imagine what people in Niceville and Blue Water Bay think of someone who lives like that. And we in
Bougie Water Bay, that's what I call it.
And then our other neighbors, they know him. We've tried to, but one day, and we know his story. We know a little bit background, so we've gotten to know him, why he's like this, and ultimately, like, is it nice to look at? No, but there's a reason he's like this. And one day, some ladies were out walking, and they kind of just stopped in front of his driveway, which is literally right next to ours. And they were just staring and just like talking. And Christy was out there, and they were just saying some really, really rude things about him. And they don't know him. And because it's not up to their standard. And they said something to Christy, asked her a question, and she was just like, he is doing the best he can. And not without sharing it, but it's like, I was just thinking, like, that is a great picture of what we're talking about. It's like, I had the standard of how everyone should live, and I think my standard's right. And you're not meeting my standard. Now, we're not even talking about God's standard. We're talking about my standard of living, my standard of righteousness, my standard of outward morality. And now I'm judging you. And they've really said some terribly rude things. And I'm like, I'm glad they talked to Christy, because I'd have been like, well, grab a shovel and help. Like, like do something.
Yeah, I think, so there's where it gets nuanced. Like, so let's use that example. So, if it's cluttery and just a bunch of stuff and not as tidy as we would like, I mean, we might be way wiser for the way we don't hoard than the way they do.
Exactly.
But, where is that line? Because other people would say, not that extreme case, but like somebody's house just isn't as, tidy. They have too much stuff. Like, there's not really like a black and white issue there. Like, there's not a clear cut answer to that. But when it does become harmful to people, I do think, that is a reason to speak into it. And I think for Christians, it's like we have a misplaced passion, because I think most believers would say, well, that's going to bring down the property value of my house who's next door, and I'm going to be so upset because it hurts me financially. But then they wouldn't be as passionate about someone who is doing something that is just, not right in God's eyes clearly, if it doesn't affect them. I think that's where, as Christians, we kind of add fuel to the fire of those who would say we're judgmental by saying, well, you shouldn't do that, and then not being like consistent in it. And it's really because we have the things that hurt us more, and we're more passionate about that, right?
Yeah. I think part of it is like in judgment, it's like you're a lot less judgy when you try to just understand where people are coming from. So like getting to know his story, and you're like, okay, like where we're coming from and our reasons for being a certain way or acting a certain way aren't necessarily an excuse that we should like just not judge things rightly. But it's so much more helpful when you like understand like, hey, this is where people are coming from. And maybe my standard of how to keep a yard clean is not the most important thing in the world.
Right.
And I think that's how when we start like, how could they live like that? How could someone be like that? Well, there's lots of reasons someone could be like that. And just having an ounce of empathy, helps a lot.
Yeah. Yeah. But then, if he were, this coming out and doing something weird, you know, with your kids.
Exactly. There would be a line where you're like, you judge right or that is wrong. And we are going to have a talk.
Yeah. And there are standards. So let's take this from the outside the church view, like people who say, hey, we should just be able to do whatever we want. Like, they don't mean that. They don't mean that. I mean,
they mean it in theory, but then just, imagine everyone actually doing everything.
And so then the popular argument, well, as long as it doesn't hurt anybody else, but it's like, how do we know?
Yeah,
like
what
really,
hurts?
If you're speeding and you say, well, my speeding on this road doesn't hurt anybody, right? Well, that law was agreed upon by a society because, the possible consequence of you speeding, because if somebody's coming, yes, sure, you're right on this desert highway, nobody's ever there, but the instant somebody's walking, the instant somebody, happens to come across, like you have all of a sudden created a greater scenario for them being harmed. And that's why God has some of the rules that he does that we don't necessarily see how it directly affects anybody, but just because we don't see how it directly affects everybody doesn't mean that there's somebody walking in the dark who we don't see, or there is somebody coming on that deserted road that we didn't see. And so we really have to trust in the Lord. And that's, as a Christian, then it's like, okay, we understand, society should be acting in a certain way and try to point to that. But ultimately, our appeal cannot be, well, hey, here's what God says. You should do it, to a person who doesn't believe in God.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because they're like, well, what standard? Yeah.
Right.
So when is judging okay?
Yeah, well, judging is okay. Judging is okay.
Yeah. We make judgments all the time.
Yeah.
Like people say, don't judge. Well, you judge things all the time. Like you judge, hey, this person is a safe person. I would trust this person with my children. I would not trust this person with me. We make judgments all the time.
Yeah. So like I coached flag football this year for the 4th year in a row. And
you picked up an extra team, I will say.
Yes, thank you. But
way to go.
There's a rule book.
Mm-hmm.
And I may or may not like some of the rules in that rule book, and other coaches may not, but the standard is the rule book.
Mm-hmm.
And, God has given us standards. And so, when we're out there doing life, like that's, as a believer, that's really the standard, and I think we have to realize that's why the gospel centrality is so important. And our appeal starts with the gospel, because you realize God gave us these rules out of love. So in Exodus, whenever God gives the 10 commandments,
mm-hmm.
you know what he says before he gives the 10 commandments?
What does he say?
He says, I'm the Lord your God who brought you out of slavery, out of Egypt.
Yeah.
Therefore, and then he says, obey.
Mm-hmm.
Like that's God. God's
that's
not
heart,
like, just obey me, do what I say, like I am when my kids aren't being good, like.
Yeah, there's the heart of the Father in there. Like,
right.
Yeah, you're my people and I want what's best for you. And I think that's a great point, because that is so often what's neglected when we talk about like the commands of God. Like it's from his heart as a father.
Yeah.
That he says these things to us because he loves us and he wants what's best for us, and he knows what's best for us is him.
Yeah.
And fellowship with him and relationship with him.
Yeah.
And
so if I'm judging, right, if I'm a referee, I'm saying, hey, here's why I'm calling this, because this is the rules, and the rules are there, to create the greatest league, greatest opportunity. Like that's the reason they're there. And the people who came up with the rules have flaws. When we're representing God, we're saying, hey, here's what God's word says. And here's why God's word says that. Because he loves you. Like that's where I don't understand why Christians are like, you shouldn't drink. The Bible actually doesn't even say that, but you shouldn't do these things. Like, it's like, well, if it's a black and white issue in the Bible, like, yes, say, homosexuality is wrong, but here's why. Like God created marriage to be a picture of Christ in the church. God created male and female to meet each other in their needs, to show our dependence, our need for dependence. Like God created for multiplication, all these things, not just stop.
Yeah. It goes back to the heart of it all. And I
Right.
think that's where Christians have rightfully, not every Christian, but Christians as a whole probably have rightfully earned the stigma of being judgmental, is because we do often hold the lamp up to, I would say, easier targets for morality and culture. That's wrong, that's wrong, that's wrong. And, meanwhile, we neglect our own sin, our own hearts. And really, it's a form of self-righteousness.
It is.
So here's a question that, I think people probably struggle with, because I don't think people listening to this, and I think most sincere Christians in general don't want to be judgmental. And the struggle is, how do you really hold to convictions of what is right and wrong and love people well, and not come across as judgmental? And I think, the easy answer is you follow the model of Jesus. Jesus did this perfectly. So how do we do that? How do we say, like, have firm convictions, make the truth known, love people well, and not come across as judgy?
You take the plank out of your eye first so that you can see clearly to take the speck out of your brother's eye.
Yeah, it's like there's a Bible verse for that.
Yeah, Matthew 7. You say, okay, what are the major, issues that I'm missing?
Mm-hmm.
And if I'm dealing with that, now I can approach this person clearly. A, maybe I was wrong.
Right.
B, now I see them the right way, because the plank is our lack of understanding the gospel, and that our righteousness comes from Jesus alone.
Mm-hmm.
And when we take that plank out and we're seeing clearly through the eyes of the blood of the cross and the value of every person, then we're able to approach their sin correctly. We still are called to approach them because they're going to hell. Like that, Matthew 7 is really dealing with salvation. If we don't say, hey, I see you're not living for God. Let's talk about why that is.
Right.
Yeah. And again, with a non-believer, the issue is not the direct sin. It's the indication that they're not living for God.
Yeah. I think we often, in that, we're like, well, I'll just be kind. I'll just be kind. And yeah, you should be kind. But also
be nice.
Yeah.
Snoop Dogg.
That's right. But there is a point where you do have to bridge that. And I think, you have to, I'm trying to remember how it was said one time. You have to.
There's a bridge to cross the great
but
divide.
it was basically like you have to build bridges in relationship that can bear the weight of the truth you have to bring. And I think that's how
that
people.
was good, man.
Yeah, I did not come up with
okay.
that. I don't know where I've heard it, but it stuck. But I think that is we have to build bridges.
Why do
Relational
I act
bridges.
so genuinely surprised that you say it? That was good. wow, Justin.
Can I write that down?
Sorry. Yeah.
Build bridges that can bear the weight of the truth we're called to tell.
Yeah,
and I think
that's good.
That's where we can come across as judgmental. Because if you know someone cares about you, and even if you disagree on something, you know they're not going anywhere, you're still going to be friends, you can receive something from them that you may not like.
Yeah. Well, and I think another thing that's very freeing, and it's taken me 10 years, 15 years to learn this, is like, I have friends who they know that I think that their life is headed towards hell, but I can't make them believe. Like, it's not my job. It's my job to love them and tell them the truth.
Yeah.
And they know, and I pray that the Lord would help our conversations to further to that end, or open their eyes through something. But it's really not my job to convict them. And I think that a lot of Christians think like, part of it's love, but also part of it is like wanting to win and be right, and I think we got to let that go. And then, it's different when it comes to believers. It's so funny because I think most Christians are like very quick to point out like the sins of the world and then not point out the sins within the church. And Paul actually addresses this in 1 Corinthians, and I think the reason why is because, we have our church people, our friends, we feel validated and affirmed. We don't want to lose something. So we're totally willing to lose connection with the world because it doesn't really hurt us that much. But when we are Christian and we have our church friends, we don't want to miss out.
Mm-hmm.
So we're not willing to have those direct conversations. When Jesus says in Matthew 18 how to approach that, 1 Corinthians 5, Paul says we have to deal with that. Galatians 5, Paul says we have to deal with that. So, I mean, it's just very clear that as believers, we should be saying, here's the sin I see in your life.
Mm-hmm. And don't you think, too, that a lot of judgmentalism and judgment, the wrong kind of judgment, not righteous judgment, is really just rooted in a lot of insecurity in people. Like, I'm not secure, and so I'm gonna judge other people because it makes me feel better about myself. And I think that's why we silly things that people judge each other over, like how, like, specific forms of like how you would raise your children or discipline your children, or books you read, or how you dress. Like, there may be wise things to. But it's like we judge people for those. Are like, why can't we just like live in grace with each other and be like, I think that's why churches, and you've been around other churches, why like some churches, it's like you go to a church and you're like, everyone here's the same. And it's like, because they're kind of conforming to these standards or traditions that might be okay, but also could just be like, oh, this is the standard of how to behave and how to act and what to engage in culturally, where it's like, the truth is the body of Christ is a lot more diverse and more messy with that. Now, the flip side of that is that you can have congregations or churches where like, we don't judge anyone and everyone's welcome as they are, which everyone should be welcome as they are. But that can't be an excuse to never like be like, hey, but we're not walking in the light in this, and you're not, just excusing things away.
Yeah.
Like
I love you. I love you enough to accept you as you are and to challenge you to become who God has created you to be.
Yeah.
I mean, that's really what church should be. And, the issues that you're talking about have existed since the beginning of time. Adam and Eve, they're in the garden. Adam, that was the woman. Eve, it was the serpent. They're both accountable for the decision they made in those moments, and then in the early church, whenever the gospel's going forth and it goes to the Gentiles, and the Gentiles have foreskin still, and, Paul and James and Peter are like, hey, what do we really believe here? Saves people, and so that's gonna change. Like, but I think the Jews like prided themselves on we're not like the Gentiles, and in my house, man, I have an 8-year-old and a 10-year-old and an 11-year-old and a 13-year-old, and all of them also have 5 and 3-year-old, but all of them, when I say something to them about not doing something, they almost always say, but so-and-so does that too, but so-and-so did this. And I'm like, I'm not talking about them. And I think when we as believers, God is dealing with our sin, we're like, but Crosspoint, they have these issues, but First Baptist Church on Bayshore, they have these issues, but that person has these issues. It's like, you're
missing the point.
Plank in your eye, so that's just all self-preservation. And I would just say, and I'll let you wrap it up, like, because I'm talking too long, like, we just need to be the people who are following Jesus. Andy Stanley said, when you stop following, you start evaluating. And I think when I am following Jesus, I am so focused on his heart to save people that I don't have time to judge people.
Yeah.
And when I'm judging people, it means I am not walking with the Lord like I should be.
Yeah, that's so true. I think that before. It's like people who usually are the most complaining about things are the people usually doing the least because they have the most time to sit and watch. And that's the same way. Like if you're following Jesus, like you're not as concerned how other people are meeting standards. You're concerned that they are following Jesus because you want them to experience the joy of knowing him and walking with him.
Do we believe the gospel? Right? Do we believe it transforms our lives?
Right.
Because if so, wouldn't our goal like just be point people to Jesus?
Yep.
Like I understand there's nuances of that, but like it wouldn't be you did this wrong. Like it would be Jesus will change all of that.
Yeah. And the root of another root, insecurity, another root of being judgmental is really a form of self-righteousness. It is like, I did something. And I think if we, it's so much easier.
You were listening to my sermon.
I listened, but it's like, I think I can look back over my life and say, by God's grace, I am becoming less judgmental in the wrong ways. Now, I'm not there yet. There's still times I'm like, but I think it's because understanding more and more and more and more and more, I was dead. I was dead, and Jesus made me alive. And it wasn't because I'm good. I say that almost every Sunday in leading worship, because I just think we got to go there. Like, it is by grace we're saved through faith. And that is really, like, whether it's someone who rejects God and his authority, whether it's another believer who is just rebelling in a certain way, or just something that needs, even something that's just a small thing that needs to be confronted. We as believers must be marked by the grace of God, because we recognize we got the plank in our eye, and that will save us so much heartache. And really, it's freeing, because then I'm not worried about, there's freedom in those conversations when you are just so saturated in the grace of God and understanding God's grace on you, that you haven't accomplished anything you've accomplished on your own. It's all because of his grace. That frees you to really have authentic, genuine relationships with people. And people know that. People can sense when you are coming from a place of grace and from a place of judgment. And they may not even like it. They may still, even coming from a place of grace, I think sometimes people are going to be hurt and offended, and it may take time to heal, may take multiple conversations, but ultimately, you can't control how people respond. But I do think the vast majority of times people are going to, over time, receive that, because people understand, or maybe not understand, but people can tell when you're coming from a place of humility and grace. And I would say that's the bottom line. I
said you wrap up, but that's our vision, is that people believe in Jesus, belong to God's family, become who God has created them to be. And, often that happens in those steps, but the truth is those three things are all kind of happening together. There's not like okay, I believe in Jesus, now I belong, and now I become. In fact, people could belong here before they believe. And even, some of the becoming starts to happen before belief. I mean, we clearly don't want people to just get, conform, but
have bright lives, but
and it's all three things. We don't want people to believe in Jesus and then never become who God's created them to be, because A, I don't know if they really believe in Jesus, and B, there's this recovery and pursuit of God's design, for our life, that thy kingdom come, thy will be done. So anyway, but hey, on a serious note then, since we're talking about this, will you stop being mean to me about Georgia football being better than Florida this year?
I will be gracious. I will enter into your pain.
Okay. All right.
Hey, we finally have a year, so I can kind of enjoy it.
Yeah, for now.
Yeah, for now, because I think next year's going to be rough. Anyway, we hope that this has been encouraging, challenging, and that you have not felt judged. Because truly, this is something we all have room to grow in. And I would just, again, reiterate, walk in the grace of God, build relationships, carry the truth, and carry it humbly. You can't understand the gospel and remain proud.
Amen.
So I just would encourage you with that. Boom.
That was pride.
That's pride blowing up. It's blowing up. So join us next week. We're going to dive in. There's the next topic in this about being hypocritical. Should be, lighthearted and easy, because none of us have ever been that way. But we're going to dive into that. So thanks for listening. We'll see you next time.
Go Gators.
Dogs.
Thanks for listening to Boggy Talk. We are so glad you joined in the conversation. Go ahead and subscribe so you don't miss a beat.